those of you listening, we're sitting in a maloca deep in the jungle of Costa Rica at Soltara Center, which you will know by now since you've listened to the beginning of this particular episode. But this is the first interview of the journey. And we have Melissa here, who's the co-founder of the center. And we just somewhat impromptu thought, you know what, let's roll down to the maloca and have a conversation and put it on tape. So I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sometimes I have conversations with people off mic and we have like a really deep, profound connection. And I think, God, where are my mics? We had a great talk before. And I was like, oh, this could be a podcast. But, you know, we'll recreate some of the magic now. And whenever you're talking and I'm on a break, I'm going to be having a smoke of this.
Sounds good. Yeah. So, we were both right before ceremony. So it was nice to kind of relive and reconnect to some of our past experiences. And then definitely helped me with the liftoff.
What was your ceremony like last night?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of a late onset for me. I actually had most of the ceremony after the ceremony was closed. But I've been dealing with some health issues with my shoulder recently, literally from working too hard, which is the like ironic thing of like working for a healing center that I'm like killing myself working for it. So it's been at first, you know, the journey has been an interesting one because at first my instinct is to be like, why am I not able to, you know, keep up and why can't I work harder? And, you know, really shame myself for a lot of that inability for my body to keep up. And it's been a pretty long journey, but I'm happy to say it's shifted to actually being really grateful for the wisdom of my body, teaching me how to have self-care and practice taking breaks and finding balance between work and life, and also drawing a lot less meaning from who I am based on what I do, because I realized how attached I am to my productivity as a metric for my self-worth. And so that's been a really interesting journey. So last night in particular was about the felt sense experience of working with my body's intelligence and realizing just how it's so easy not to listen to our bodies or just to sort of assume the way that we have to compensate if we're lacking physically in some way. So I was really able to kind of connect to my shoulder, but then also realizing how much it actually goes up to my neck, how it's all connected to my thought processes, and how when I have certain thoughts, they actually affect my whole system. And it kind of, I was like watching it travel down my nerves. And then I had a really, really good purge about being more unapologetic about taking time for myself and space for myself. So yeah, and that all happened in like the last 20 minutes of the ceremony and then for like 3 hours afterwards. So it was quite the journey.
I find so interesting about this particular plant medicine is the compact nature of realizations like that.
Yeah.
Right? I have a few years on you and, you know, not to say that you haven't done other work, perhaps you have, and we'll get into that. But I mean, there's things that I've been shown in a similar way, insights about myself and my life in ceremony that I didn't even begin to scratch the surface of in years of, you know, therapy and group therapy and all the different healing modalities and meditating for 20 minutes a day, twice a day for years and all the different things. It's just so incredible how you can be shown something like that without the assistance of another person.
Yeah.
You know, isn't that interesting? It's like, the ceremonies I've been in, the guides aren't sitting there like, so what do you want to talk? It's not like a therapy, you know, like you don't talk to them. It's just, they're just there for you, at least in my very few experiences. But it's like you get the same realizations from ayahuasca that you would from sitting with a wise elder or a therapist or a spiritual counselor or guide, where they can give you an objective point of view on yourself.
Yeah.
It's so trippy that you can just do that within yourself by drinking a shot of some Jägermeister tasting weird licorice juice.
It does kind of taste like that. Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like more self-empowering because you're coming to these realizations by yourself. And so there's no one to even project your healing onto in any way or as a crutch. It's almost like, you know, in a way, it's really pointing the mirror back at you. And we were kind of talking about this yesterday, where you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes like it'll bring up memories and things from your past. And like for me, and I think for you as well, it was just like things that we had no idea even affected us in this way. And so because there's no like therapist out there that can necessarily tell you like this is, but when you're like discovering it for yourself, because all of a sudden your neurons are firing and you're leaning into where trauma is stored in your body, and having that physical embodied felt sense experience, like it's just, it really, I feel like for me, it's really gotten to like the root of some of the things that are kind of hidden inside my nervous system that I wouldn't have known otherwise.
Do you ever find it difficult to be in your co-founder role here? Are you working operations? Is that kind of your seat in the bus?
Yeah.
Speaking?
Like COO. So kind of like managing the managers, so to speak. And it's such a gray area for
I'm just thinking like, you don't really, in my, again, limited experience, I'm obviously a novice in the world of plant medicine, but I'm very fascinated by so many things about it. But it's like, I don't feel like when I'm on retreat like this, drinking ayahuasca, that I would necessarily be able to get up and like crush it at work every day the next day. Even though there isn't a hangover per se, there is definitely sleep interruption.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
I mean, yesterday was the first day of ceremony and my sleep was so wacky. I mean, we started at 8. I slept for a couple hours in here after my first cup, kind of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm meditating for like 2 hours a day. Then I woke up in the middle of the night, couldn't go back to sleep. I'm up at 7. And, it's very erratic. And I'm imagining like working here and you're taking ayahuasca. Like how often would you say you participate in ceremony while you're here doing your thing work-wise?
Yeah. So kind of in the beginning of setting this project up and when I was managing operations for a center in Peru that Dan, the other co-founder, had, I would drink a little bit more often. So it would be maybe like once a week kind of back in Peru and maybe like twice a month or so in the beginning of this. And it is very interesting because, watching the progression, because I'm living here, I'm working here, I'm doing self-work, I'm integrating the healing, and then the integration of my healing affects Soltara. And, it's all very like tied in together. And it's funny because when I was kind of looking ahead and trying to figure out like what career path I wanted, and I never could have anticipated this, but I had it in my head that I never wanted to like work to live, in that I was just doing a job so that I could then go home and have my life. But I wanted to live to work, which meant that I was doing something that I loved. And like I couldn't have gotten more of an answer to that in this way. But it comes with its own unique challenges because I'll be in ceremony and I'll have a difficult time separating, work and because I'm like, oh shoot, like we should do, this a little bit better, or why aren't these lights off, or like, you know what I mean? So it's really been and the journey with kind of working myself to a point of where it's actually harming my health has kind of forced me to take a look at my boundaries and, I am not Soltara. Soltara is not me. And how can I make space for myself within this, within the space and context of, being in this sort of place where your process is happening all the time. It's a constant, but I do feel like it's like the plants have kind of put me on a fast track and I'm not really sure where I'm headed, but it's been a wild ride. That's for sure.
Oh my God. I can only imagine. Give us a little bit of background, how you ended up first going to Peru and experiencing the medicine and how that, if you can kind of summarize that story, because I want to cover some other stuff, but
sure.
how you start from the beginning, kind of how you ended up interested in medicine, your first experiences in Peru, and how you ended up full circle, running this place.
Yeah. So, I definitely come from and resonate with a very Western mindset. And I come from a background in science and engineering. I have like a degree in engineering, and I really thought that the STEM field was my path, and I was doing cancer research and all of these things. And it wasn't until the very end of my degree where I became open to the idea of psychedelics and was kind of introduced to psychedelics. And that really opened up, oh my goodness, like there's a lot more here. And so right before I had to take this very corporate job after I graduated, I was kind of like looking on the internet, on Reddit actually, and Dan, who's now the other co-founder here, had posted on the like ayahuasca sub forum of Reddit. I take people into the jungle to do ceremonies with shamans. And I was like, wow, that sounds like really interesting. And the timing just happened to be perfect for between graduating and starting this job. And so I just like messaged him back and forth a little bit and got a really good feeling. And I was like, I think I want to do this. And my partner at the time was like, I'm sorry, you're going to go do drugs in the jungle with some dude you met on Reddit? Like, are you crazy? Like, no. And I was like, I don't know. I just have a good feeling about this. And, you know, looking back, it's kind of like that was really the first time where I actually just followed my intuition instead of really doing what I thought I should do as part of like the life path that you're kind of handed down from your, you know, from my parents. And so I was like, I don't know, man, I've got to do this. Like, if you're nervous, like come with me and we'll do it together. So we did, and it was really powerful, and it all kind of happened really fast. But I basically told Dan at the end of it, like, look, I love what you're doing. Like, I have to go take this job. I think I'm going to hate it. So like, let's keep in touch and see how things go. And then 2 years later, he had built his own center down there and kind of expanded things. And he was looking for an operations manager. And at that time, I was 2 years into a job that I hated exactly as much as I thought I would. And I was asking for some big change, trying to find other jobs. And then he said he was looking for an operations manager. And I was like, if you can pay me, I will learn Spanish, sell my things, like drop everything and move to Peru like right now. Like, and he was like, okay. I was like, all right, let's do it. So yeah, I ended up doing that for a year and a half, almost 2 years. And then, and then we felt that, and he had sold part of the previous center to another owner and was kind of looking for the next thing. And we found this amazing property in Costa Rica and just really felt like we could do some sort of evolution of everything we had learned from our time in Peru. And what we really felt was needed was an integration focus, because a lot of these retreat centers were just having these profound experiences, but then they were going back home to the same patterns and the same life and just not really feeling supported. For me, the integration was extremely difficult as well. So this was kind of like what I wish I had when I was doing that work in Peru. So trying to be a little bit of a bridge, keeping with the indigenous tradition, but also understanding people are going back into the Western world.
It's interesting geographically because Costa Rica could be said to be a bridge between
that's so
Peru
funny. Yes.
and North America.
Literally
right?
The global North and the global South. It's like right there. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. And this property is insane. I mean, it's really beautiful. It's fantastic.
It was the first property that we found, and we looked at maybe 10 others, but we were like, no, this is it.
How does it work with legality in terms of citizenship and the ability to buy property and have a residency here and things like that?
Yeah. So it's actually really great because if you invest a certain amount in actually like land property here, then the Costa Rican government allots a certain number of work visas for foreign people to come and work. So it's still a long process. It takes like a couple of years to go through, but yeah, so it's kind of like involved in the property purchase.
Oh, cool. Interesting. And what happened to the boyfriend that you took to Peru? Did he have a positive experience and continue on with exploring plant medicines or?
It's so funny because when we're best friends now. But I ended up, when I went down to Peru, it was, I was like, I'm leaving. So like, we need to end this. And it was time anyway. And so, he like was very skeptical and I was an atheist for a minute there as well. And, just very like logical and science minded. And, so he kind of was skeptical of me going down and he's like, you're like an engineer, you're going to go down and become this like neo hippie, like shaman healer person, like, woo woo, all of this. And, it's funny because it actually, blocked me from really connecting to the process for a while because I was just like, I don't want to become this like, woo-woo person. And I had all of this fear around like letting go of some of these constructs. He had a good experience the first time, but he didn't really connect too much. So then I went down to Peru and spent a long time trying to undo some of that fear and really be okay with my experiences and kind of owning that. And then a year after I was down in Peru, he came down and had 2 more ceremonies and cured his depression in 2 ceremonies. And he was like, okay, this shit works. And I was like, wow, it took me 3 months like for it to get out of this. And you come down and you do 2 ceremonies and now you're on board. And now he's like basically a hippie. We go to Burning Man and stuff. So I'm like, yeah.
A convert.
A convert for sure.
Yeah. I have a hard time seeing how that couldn't happen to some degree to most people. I mean, I guess I don't know, maybe if you don't have an effective dose, which I'm sure happens from time to time, but like last night, which I won't go into now because I'll do a debriefing after we record about that and do a little snippet for the podcast. But like if that had been my only experience, I don't know that I would have become a convert. But if you get the full experience, I think it would be difficult to ignore that there's more going on than meets the eye, Yeah,
that's exactly how I feel. And, I think that it definitely seems to open people up to the possibility that at least we probably don't know what's going on, and so to necessarily put that in a box becomes a lot harder to do afterwards. And for me, it's I didn't really believe in like plant spirits. And then, all of a sudden I'm like talking to one. And so I'm like, okay, I guess the empirical evidence adds up. Like, there we are.
And tell us a little bit about the tradition of the healers that you have here conducting ceremony.
Yeah. So
it's quite different than the prior experience that I had.
Okay, yeah, there's
in the just the way the whole thing's run and the whole vibe and music and ambiance and Picaros being sung and just the whole thing was definitely like steeped in tradition. And I wouldn't say that, not in a restrictive way, but you guys run a tight ship here. I mean, it's definitely encouraged that you don't just come and just randomly do your own thing. There's like a schedule and dieta and all of this. So I'm curious a little bit about the origins of that tradition, at least, an overview of that and why you chose to integrate here in Costa Rica following that tradition.
Yeah. So I've worked with the Shipibo tradition since I really got started on this journey. And the communities that we worked with down in Peru was kind of how we got connected and how we really came to know the way that they do things. And it's very close to my heart. It's, there are many, many different traditions throughout the Amazon jungle. I think there's over 70 different tribes that work with the medicine. So the Shipibo are considered one of the older carriers of the medicine. They work in a lineage fashion. So a maestro will have an apprentice, and the apprentice will kind of study under that maestro for a period of time, sometimes, up to 10 years, something like that, before the maestro kind of lets them know, okay, you're ready to kind of take this on your own. In that process, the way that the apprenticeship kind of works, and I'll just kind of scratch the surface here, but they work with different master plants in the jungle. So if you can think of the healer as a surgeon in a hospital, the plants that they've worked with and apprenticed with and dieted with are kind of their doctors underneath that they sort of direct into and channel through the healing songs that they sing in ceremony. So a dieta is essentially taking a small amount of whichever master plant you're looking to study with, drinking it, and then following a very, very strict diet, like no oil, salt, fat, sugar, energetic exchanges via sex or otherwise. Oftentimes they're in isolation. And that can last anywhere from 10 days to over a year or more. And the purpose is to really cleanse the body and mind and spirit, get to a very, very clean place such that you're able to commune with the subtle energies that the plant has. And if you do that for a long time and you work with ayahuasca to help you connect to that particular plant, then you'll start to pick up on the subtle energies of that plant. And eventually, perhaps, the plant might come through you in the form of a nicaro, which is the healing songs that they sing during ceremony. So to become a master healer, it's a very intense and arduous process because you're doing that with all of these different plants that you're accumulating, and they're like, tools in the toolbox, so to speak. And so what's happening in ceremony is it's actually the healing songs, the Icaros, that they consider to be the main conduit of healing. So you can't really have a Shipibo ceremony without Shipibo healers singing Icaros, or Shipibo trained healers singing Icaros. In fact, in the old days, and I think they might have told you this in the talk, only the healers would drink ayahuasca and the patients would just receive the song. So to them, the ayahuasca is just allowing them access to this energetic field that sort of pervades all things. And they're reading the energy field of the patient. And from that, they're able to channel these plant spirits and correct the energetic knots in the patient's body. So it's fascinating. And, I've come in and sat in ceremony and just not even drank, just received the song. And so, of course, nowadays, people drink to go a little bit deeper themselves. But yeah, it's a really beautiful, it's done in a smaller setting. So I think other traditions might have up to 70 or more people in a ceremony. We like to keep things small, and that's in line with the tradition. So we have about 20 people. And that allows the healers to go around and sing individual songs to each person based on their intention and what they read and diagnose. And so, to your point about kind of moving into Costa Rica, when we really saw that these medicines were sort of expanding into the world, what we felt was maybe getting a little bit lost in that was this connection to the indigenous tradition and the indigenous roots. And so Costa Rica being a bit of a bridge between worlds and a little bit more accessible for people who may not have the ability or wherewithal to kind of go all the way into the Amazon jungle. We felt that this was a really great way to have a bit of a stepping stone for people.
For those of us that are too high maintenance to go in. As I'm sitting here sweating balls and I'm like, can we get some AC up in this bitch? Like, seriously.
Well, it's really cool because I'll say that, for people with like mobility issues or people that enjoy AC, and I'm one of those people. Like I did a year and a half in Peru and like it was fantastic. But at the end of it, I was like, just a couch and like some air conditioning once in a while would be nice. And so it allows people that maybe wouldn't otherwise do that to have this experience and keep with the tradition as much as we can. So
yeah, I think that's really important because there are going to be a number of people that don't want to rough it. Just
right.
due to age or, like you said, mobility. I mean, I've been in ceremony with people in their 80s and like, they're not going down and taking a canoe up the fucking Amazons. It's just like, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. So that was literally our previous center. So you're right. It's nice
and being here, I mean, like the room I'm in is beautiful. The AC is bumping. I have it set to like 40 degrees every night. I'm just in heaven, or whatever Celsius, the lowest setting with the highest fan.
Yeah.
And I'm in heaven, but
it's a nice place to decompress afterwards.
Yeah, and just the pool and the ambiance and everything like that. Now I have, like when I went to Rhythmia before, I did have a couple of my plant medicine aficionado purists kind of like look down their nose at me like, oh, you have to go to this posh like 5-star thing. That's not the real deal. And I'm like, it's the same medicine, dude. Like, why? Sure. You're already going to purge and like see your demons and shit. Why make it even more uncomfortable?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm already uncomfortable just feeling slightly nauseous and, seeing the weight of my 49 years worth of trauma, like in one instant. I mean, it can be arduous enough without being terribly uncomfortable. And
well, that's just the thing. I mean, like you mentioned, it's like, it's so much about the container, you say kind of like we run a tight ship here. And I think it's really important. And certainly what I've learned from participating in sort of different retreats and seeing things done like loosely, which can be fine, if you have that experience, but really what I've learned is that it's all about the strength of the container. And so the ultimate way for people to get the most out of their healing is for them to feel safe first. You have that like baseline covered, and then they're able to really let go and, get what they need out of it. So if people feel safe in a different environment, I think that's perfectly, normal. And yeah,
I think there's a certain, because the experience subjectively of drinking ayahuasca is so, there's so much disorder in that. You know what I mean? It's so dysregulating and so jarring that I feel having the container and the structure, it's not like it's uptight or something. It's, you could do whatever you want, but it's not like, not their rules, their suggestions, that kind of thing. But
yeah, we try
I
to
think
keep it pretty.
for me, it's like just, having to be somewhere at a certain time and like not keep people waiting and eating certain foods and not others. And just the whole, you guys told me I couldn't drive my car up and down the driveway. And I'm like, I get it. That's safe. It's
right.
I don't have a problem with any sort of restrictions because I know when I get in this dwelling that we're in right now, that I'm going to be in this extraterrestrial grid, like talking to God, and it's going to be like so otherworldly and so unstructured and unbridled that it's kind of nice having just, okay, this is the way we do it. And, don't wander down to the beach on ayahuasca. And, there's a lot of very common sense suggestions / guidelines that I think are probably very supportive of the experience, especially for people that come in with a lot of fear.
Well, that's just it, right? And so, people can have legitimate fears about, having bad trips, right? And so the way that we kind of try to address that fear in people that maybe don't have the experience or have had the experience and it has been, not supportive for their process is, it's not bad, it's challenging, but you can only do that reframe if you actually feel like you're safe. And so like creating a bit of structure can allow people to really relax into that and just know that they're held well. And so then when they go into the abyss and enter the chaos, right, they're able to at least be like, I can trust that I'm still safe. I'm like, this process is for me. And, I can trust myself. I can trust the medicine. I can trust the set and setting. And in that way, whatever comes out is really, towards my process and my healing and, highest good, hopefully.
I think another interesting aspect of the tradition that you guys follow here is, well, one thing I really enjoy is that you guys are blue light informed. So there's not like blue light in here. I have my blue blockers. I wore those in my last ceremonies because the lights were dim, but they were still like not firelight,
Do you know that is such a thing?
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, sick. Everyone has to have red flashlights. That's what I have anyway. I travel with that everywhere,
Nice.
But it's an interesting experience last night was just like how profoundly dark it is in here. Literally the only light you see is moonlight coming in kind of through the screen. And also it was I don't know, jarring is the right word because I don't know if silence can be jarring, but it was a little unsettling how much time in silence there was which I'm not used to. There's like always kind of music and people burning all kinds of plants and there's a lot of like movement and a lot of guides and all sorts of stuff in my prior experiences. And I was kind of like, when are they going to bump the tunes? It's I'm really just sitting with myself in such a profoundly still and present way. And I'm, as I said, someone who I really enjoy meditation and solitude. And I don't typically have a problem being alone with myself. But in ceremony, I don't know, there's just this certain ambiance of stillness while we're sort of waiting for the maestros to begin the Icaros.
Yeah.
And, it's like, it's so dark, it's so quiet, and there's this ominous feeling of like, when's the medicine going to hit? And it's like, I don't know, there's this mystique to it, I think, that was really, really special and different for me.
It's so funny that you picked up on that because I really love the simplicity with which the Shipibo work. So in this tradition, there's no instruments, there's no altar, there's no lights, there's nothing besides basically their song, their mapacho, and their agua de Florida, which is what they use to kind of spray you with afterwards.
I'm going to give you guys props on another thing too, is in the agua de Florida.
Agua de Florida.
Yeah, this like flower water kind of perfume. That stuff normally makes me so sick. Like that will make me purge because I can't stand the smell of it because it smells like chemicals.
Okay, yeah,
I'm kind of chemical sensitive.
Sure.
So I've just been using natural shit for 20 plus years.
Yeah,
So if I walk in a room, someone sprayed Lysol or something, I'm like, it's so gnarly. But the little jungle juice here actually smells quite pleasant. And Todd rattled off like the list of ingredients and made a point to say, and there's no chemicals, but you smell it. It does smell like perfume, but it also just smells like a really beautiful blend of essential oils and alcohol. Kind of,
yeah, we actually started making our own here. The Agua de Florida, the shamans typically use this. And for people kind of familiar with ayahuasca, it'll probably ring a bell. And it does have a little bit of like it's store-bought, but they're just buying it, like whatever, right? So actually we did make the transition to making our own version, and it's called rounding tea. And Scott, our retreat director, has kind of gathered together different plants and essential oils and things like that, and like put it in these little bottles. And it's such a great way to kind of really connect to the plants and also kind of cleanse. And for me, it helps keep the medicine down a little bit too, right in the beginning.
I was actually so relieved when I got my little bottle and smelled it, because on the plane ride down here, I was like, fuck, I forgot my surgical mask. I was literally,
really?
I was literally going to wear one until you guys told me, take that shit off. You're going to interrupt the process. But I'm like, I can't smell that stuff. It's just like so.
Oh, yeah.
It's so gnarly. And I got the sense, and I'm so glad you let me in on this, that they're going to like the drugstore and buying some little perfume or some shit. It's like, it's super nasty.
It's interesting.
And it's so pervasive in the space at times. So that was a huge relief for me. And another thing I thought was interesting, again, I've only had 4 ceremonies, so my contrast is very limited, but something that was in the tradition that I did before was, doing the snuff, the hape. It's like this powdered tobacco that you snort, and I don't find that terribly pleasant, but I went along with it just because I want to roll deep in the cut with the whole experience.
Sure.
But you guys have these little delicious things that I've been smoking here. Those of you watching the video will know. And I'm like, don't let me go home with any of these. They're very habit forming. Like since last night, I'm like, where's that thing? I got to go huff on that. But tell me about what this is.
Yeah. So this is not your run-of-the-mill cigarette. This is mapacho, and it's sacred tobacco. It's actually tobacco puro, which is different than I think what they use in kind of your store-bought cigarettes. It's actually wild caught, and so grown in the wild, and from the Amazon. And so it's basically literally just that. And tobacco is its own master plant in and of itself. And every healer will have dieted tobacco at one point because it's one of the most common tools that they use in ceremony. So it serves 2 purposes depending on your intention. So it can actually ground you and bring you down. If that's what's needed. It can also serve to help elevate the medicine and kind of bring you into that space. And so you'll see the healers smoking their pipes with this, before ceremony, cleaning the space, kind of putting the intention out there, and giving thanks to mapacho as well, because it's actually said, part of the legend that of the way ayahuasca was even discovered in the Amazon was that it was tobacco that guided the people to originally know which 2 plants to combine into a brew. So it kind of goes like all the way back to the beginning there.
Oh, that's interesting. I've always wondered about that when, you look at like the bufo frog, and it's like, who's the first human that was like, hey, let me scrape some of this goo off this frog and smoke it and see what happens? Like, how the fuck did they come up with this stuff?
Right.
And I've often thought that there's a relation, like, well, that guy took mushrooms and then like started fucking with this frog. Like this, it's like,
right?
There has to be like, or smoked cannabis or something. There's like a catalyst of something else. So that kind of makes sense.
I mean, these plants are way smarter than we are. So I imagine there is some sort of like lineage of thought or knowledge that's kind of passed on to us, and then we finally are like, oh, okay, cool, now we're listening.
I really like the tobacco, I think, because and I don't, I use nicotine like kind of medicinally. I don't smoke anymore because I was super addicted to like smoking and cigars and cigarettes and the whole thing forever. When I finally quit, I was like, never again.
Yeah, I've been there as well.
But I find at home, I'll do little nicotine lozenges when I want to do focused work. And then I come to find out like nicotine is a great nootropic in a really small dose, like 2 milligrams,
Okay.
So you get these little like trying to quit smoking mints and put them up in your cheek and gum.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's really amazing for creativity and focus. And so I was like, oh, I get this. And when I started smoking this last night, which I had a little trepidation about just because I'm like, I don't smoke anymore. Like it's a hard no. But in the context of this,
Yeah, it's different.
But it did like really help me in a much more subtle way than the hape, which makes me kind of sick. And there's so much spitting and just like,
Yeah.
But this, it's like I was able to sit and really be still and kind of meditate with it. And I was like, oh, I'm feeling that nootropic effect of the nicotine.
Yeah.
In addition to the spiritual element that you just talked about.
Yeah, it can really help. And similar for me, it really helps me to kind of come back to my body a little bit and almost kind of take a step back and be like, oh, here I am. I'm here. And I just like feel the presence of it. And like the nicotine kind of makes my nervous system a little more aware of the surroundings. And so, I think it's definitely my preferred mode of kind of settling into the space.
It kind of wakes you up a little bit too. Because I find like when I have the first cup, often I get pretty like kind of drowsy and dreamy. And even last night when I sat back up for my song, I took a little puff. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm here again. It kind of brought me back online and didn't, so I didn't just melt into the mat and kind of just disappear and miss out on my beautiful Icaro,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the singing last night from Teo and Marina was just,
oh my gosh. So
and
beautiful.
I didn't, and I'll do my little report. I only had one cup just because I kind of didn't understand the protocol. So I missed the second one. So I wasn't having like a full psychoactive experience. But still, even just like you said, the singing was so hypnotic and so beautiful. And both of their voices together. And like I was listening to her sing and I'm going like, how does a human sing that high? Like I could honestly,
it's otherworldly.
She is like the highest pitched voice I think I've ever heard live. It was just incredible. And like as a musician, I was going like, what key is she? Like, how is she even doing that?
Yeah.
And there was the contrast between the animals in the surrounding jungle. There's like some cows down there.
Oh my God, did you hear that cow? Oh my God, it was like its own Icaro the whole night.
Yeah, and it was really trippy because there was the cows and then there was dogs over on the other side. They were going off pretty hard for a while.
Our friends here.
And then all the insects and then all the birds. And I was thinking like, wow, that's so interesting how humans have such a variety of different sounds we can make as an animal. And like the cow pretty much has one note. It's like, what? That's it. It's like, dogs, I mean, unless the dog's crying, or yelping or something because they're hurt or something like that. But dogs pretty much just have woof, woof, woof. Cows have
I was actually thinking about this in ceremony last night because I was like listening to these creatures, especially the cows. And I was like, I wonder what they're talking about.
Me too.
Like, I wonder what
I was doing that too. I was having that same thought. I was like, it must be a mating thing. Like the one cow's like, get over here.
Netflix and chill.
Yeah, I'm ready. But I was having that same thought. I thought, God, what a limited expression. And even the monkeys, they have a couple. And I'm like, only birds and people really
Birds for sure have a lot more variety. But then I'm also wondering like, are there subtleties in the different, like, are there differences that maybe we just can't detect or is there some form of like other communication? Because like this is what I was thinking about in ceremony last night, like how long all of these animals have evolved. There must be nuances to them. Like and so maybe it's just, and so we hear it as part of this like big symphony of sound and maybe don't differentiate. But yeah, I wonder what their kind of like world communication is.
It was a neat sort of mosaic of auditory stimuli. All of the animals, including the two Peruvian animals as our maestros, the human animals and the beautiful sounds they were making. It was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I'm curious, in your experiences in Peru prior to this and then in this center, what's the oldest person you've seen take the medicine and what's the youngest person?
So the oldest person, oh, God bless her. She was awesome. She's a champ. I think she was 74. And my personal like experience that came through the center. And it was actually a group of friends that all came and they were all these ladies in their 70s. And, it was awesome because they were just so gung-ho about just going for it. And, just like really like young in spirit. But I really commend people. I mean, we've had people in their 70s, drink medicine and, you think about that's a lot of years to kind of work through, especially if it's kind of like your first time. And I just really it's humbling, like the courage that it takes to really kind of go and go all the way down. And this was actually in Peru. So they went all the way, did the canoe thing and everything. And and came out of it, and just had really just did such amazing work. And then the youngest was 18, so that's the youngest age that we would allow.
Your lower limit.
Mm-hmm.
And then what about, did you ever see anyone younger in Peru in the less sanctioned, more traditional ceremonies? And from the Shipibo tradition, like before Whitey started going down and taking the medicine, would they ever give it to kids or like teenagers? Do they have kind of a drinking age in that tradition?
Not really, because some of the healers that we worked with actually had children, so they tend to have bigger families, and at least a few of them will usually kind of carry on and apprentice under their parents. And so actually one of the healers that we worked with in Peru had a boy who had started drinking at 4 years old, just like super, super tiny amounts. And to them, it's truly a medicine. It's not a drug. And if anything, really, we can kind of get into the scientific side of things, but it continues or helps improve the neuroplasticity of the brain. And so young children are extremely neuroplastic already. So in that sense, it really just continued that. It didn't necessarily inhibit or, maybe prevented them from becoming less neuroplastic in that way. And so very small amounts, but as young as 4.
That's so interesting. And what you're saying about the elderly people too is like all of the more years to unpack all the shit you've been through, because it is such to me, like so far in my, I guess, 5 experiences now, the underlying purpose of it for me so far has been to heal trauma. Like that's pretty much it. Mm. It's like a healing experience of things that have happened. And at times, not just in ceremony, but just all of the different things I do toward healing all the different elements of my being. It's like, I was thinking about this today. It's as if the first 26 years of my life, I just completely was wrecked by other people or myself. And I've spent like 26 to 49 undoing all that bullshit,
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's like to think, wow, what if one could start the healing with plant medicine earlier before you've had as much time to stack on all of that.
Sure. And that's
all of that sometimes painful life experience.
No, absolutely. I feel a very, very strong calling towards helping make this accessible to, as many people that, would be served by it as physically possible, because I think that the more that we can kind of undo some of the damage and also, help people to, rather than kind of cover up the symptoms for years and try and do different things as part of the Western medical model. And there's, of course, other holistic paths to the same thing as well. But this can be a powerful way to really just get to the root of it. And the sooner we can get to the root of it, the sooner the rest of the branches line up again, And we work very closely with some veterans organizations. And that's one aspect of access that I think is, as soon as we can possibly have more access for veterans who especially are suffering from PTSD and, trauma and depression and grief, get them the help that they need. Because, some of this trauma is so deeply wired that you almost need a way to connect these different parts of the brain to really get at the amygdala, where your traumas are really stored.
Yeah.
And this is scientifically, it activates the amygdala, which is, where you store your fear and trauma in an emotional level. And then it activates the frontal lobe. I think it's the neofrontal cortex, but don't quote me on that. And that's where your kind of conscious thinking mind is. And then it activates the bridge between. So it essentially is allowing you direct conscious access to these deep-seated memories. And then you're able to literally rewire them and create new memories or reevaluate old memories. So this is legitimate science. I mean, they've shown this in brain scans. And so, I think that there's a place for, antidepressants and all of these different medications that are currently out there. And I just think that this is a very powerful adjunct modality for people that, maybe aren't served by that current model.
Yeah, I agree. And I got the sense in prior ceremonies that I guess I talked about it in my podcast I did earlier this year, so it won't sound that crazy. But if anyone's listening, they're going to be like, he's fucking nuts. But the experiences that I had before, as I was telling you a little bit about yesterday, and some would say like, don't share your visions and stuff because you kind of, deplete their value. But it's kind of my job to share these things, to put everything out there to kind of pique people's interest and build awareness about such modalities. But the first couple nights, everything that I was experiencing and seeing was very mechanistic, and it was also otherworldly or other dimensionally. In other words, like I didn't have relatives from the past visit me that had passed on. I didn't see faces or animals or trees or dirt or sky or water. There was nothing earthly. It was all like not outer space, but other dimension. And it was as if I was like in this not alternate reality, but as if the veil of my physical senses had been pushed aside or lifted. And I was like a fish that had poked his head above water and was like, oh, fuck, there's a whole other world up here.
Have I been in water this whole time?
Yeah. And so it was like, whoa, I'm like accessing this grid. It felt like a grid or a matrix where this intelligence coming in the form of this light machinery / E.T. craft kind of situation was hovering around me, in me, above me, and I'm laying in my mat and I'm sort of being enveloped in this, just this E.T. thing. But not E.T. as in like little green men, but more mechanical, light, extraterrestrial, meaning not of this physical world. And what it was doing the first couple nights was doing like mechanical surgery on my body and specifically on my brain. And so it would like these light sort of geometric patterns that you see kind of when you typically hallucinate on different things were there, but they had a purpose. They weren't just random like, oh, a light show. This is fun.
Yeah.
It was like, I got the sense, okay, we're going to do some shit. And I just surrendered and I'd be, okay, I'm ready, do whatever. And then it would, little things would kind of come down and like go in my brain and start moving stuff around. And I could feel things inside my brain like being sort of jarred loose and adjusted. It was like a chiropractic adjustment from an ET spaceship made of neon lights that don't stop moving in different shapes.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
but
you felt there was like an intelligence.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
there.
And it knew what it was doing and it knew exactly what it was going for. And there was one point in which, I mean, I can't wait to share my experiences here, but these are the, the most recent ones that aside from last night. But there was one point where I started really seeing the depth of some trauma that I had experienced as a kid for a long time. And I've dealt with it. I've talked about it. I've written about it. I've been in therapy. I've done the 12 steps. I've done fucking everything to heal it. And it has healed a lot. But I was shown like kind of that it was much worse than I ever thought, in a sense. Like it had impacted me negatively much more profoundly than I could ever conceive of until that moment. And it was really centered kind of in my heart, and then those sort of entities or that intelligence and that kind of light machinery thing telescoped this kind of beam or rod of light down out of itself toward my chest. And it was like, like clicking and making all these sounds. And then it like locked onto my heart chakra and was just like, like physically healing it, like R2-D2 kind of shit in a way. You know what I mean?
I literally pictured R2-D2.
Yeah, like when he pops out his little and connects. It was kind of like that, but not. They weren't robots, but they weren't little alien grain men. It was, like I said, just this other expansive, non-local intelligence that knew exactly what I needed and proceeded to do that.
Yeah.
And that's when like the tears are flowing and all this stuff, but it wasn't it wasn't like sometimes you cry and you're expressing grief and it really sucks, to feel it. It was actually kind of joyful, even though it was profoundly sad.
Yeah, like you're unlocking this part that you maybe didn't have access to before.
Yeah. So in the heart and the brain specifically, to your point earlier, is just some sort of surgery happening there, divine surgery and healing that I don't know would be possible in any other way. I mean, I'm sure there are you've got EMDR and hypnosis and all sorts of,
Sure.
there's all sorts of things which I've done and they've been helpful, but that kind of thing is just such a so impactful and runs so deep, and you really get the sense that it knows what it's doing.
Well, that's just it. For me, I mean, I've never come across anything more powerfully personal in the way that it seems to know exactly what you need. Even if you don't necessarily know what you need, it's just kind of like you were saying, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how these things affected you or what even was. So it's hard to know where to start when you're, trying these other, like talk therapy or, some other forms of therapy, or you're masking the symptoms with, other chemicals. And so like for this, because I did cancer research and I, was very interested in figuring out how to cure, this disease from like a biological standpoint. And coming into this work, it really opened up and expanded my idea of what healing really means. And because I had never seen any sort of medicine or therapy be so effective across so many different types of things. I mean, you're talking grief, trauma, depression, anxiety, PTSD, like chronic illness, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, like physical injuries. It's just like the spectrum of things that, because, and I think that the reason for that, one of the reasons for that is because it actually views you as a whole person. You are more than just your physical, chemical, bodily makeup. You are also an emotional being and a, mental being and a spiritual being. And so by addressing all of those parts of the self, especially in the context of ceremony, because ceremony invites that connection to ritual and spirit and, the container within which to have an experience where you're able to let go and get to that next level is, that's to me, that's what holistic healing is about. Like looking at the person as a whole being and addressing it as that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think many of us, myself included, at times have chased our tail trying to fix it from a or like a single direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm having these physical symptoms. Let me go after that. Or, I've got depression. Let me go after the mind. Or I think I need God in my life. So you go after that. And then
yeah, exactly.
At times you kind of end up in this maze of whack-a-mole at the fair, where you're like, okay,
this is the perfect visual.
I fixed my digestion. Oops, anxiety, fuck, and then it's like existential loneliness. Oops, it's like,
oh my God.
It is hard to find kind of one thing, seemingly in my journey, and I've looked wide and far, that does address things in a holistic way like that. It's so fascinating. One of the things I think that's really crazy about plant medicines and, specifically thinking of iboga and ayahuasca is that this was a huge barrier to entry for me, having been someone who had really gnarly drug addiction problems and alcoholism and all this stuff earlier in life, because the traditional Western model that's been most successful throughout recorded history is complete abstinence and then developing a spiritual framework by which to live, a la 12-step programs, right? Going to rehab, like what do they teach you? They teach you the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You pay 30 grand for that fucking book, basically,
Okay.
And so the model there is like, your problem is you need to find God. And if you find God, you'll be healed and you won't have the desire to drink and use because you'll be healing and living your life in a way that is less painful. Like, in other words, you find a way to interpret reality subjectively that doesn't hurt you anymore.
Wow.
You can live within your own skin by practicing spiritual principles and finding God. But the price for entry into that life is complete abstinence. So if you're like a weed head, you can't start drinking beer in place of weed or you're going to become an alcoholic. And if you're into crystal meth, you can't switch to Coke to get out,
Right.
Because I tried all that. I literally would be like, I remember, and I realized I was an alcoholic, for example. This is the kind of logic that fucking addicts come up with. This was a real plan too, I swear to God. I was a really bad alcoholic in my, kind of through my teens, it started to progress. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, I was very much aware that I was really a hardcore alcoholic. And so I just I drank every day. I couldn't stop. I was just out of hand. It was fun at times. I'm not going to lie. And they were fun. I was living in Hollywood. I'm 19, 20, like having fun, as you can imagine, playing in a band.
Yeah.
But I realized like, man, this is getting really bad. And so someone turned me on to heroin. And I realized right away that if I did heroin, that I couldn't drink and didn't want to drink. And a couple of times I tried to drink and you would just puke profusely. And it was like an antibute, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, you can't really drink on heroin. At least none of the junkies I hung out with could.
Okay.
So my thinking was like, this is amazing. I'm just going to do heroin.
Replace that.
Yeah, I'm like a junkie. That's perfect. You know, I was like, as long as I'm not an alcoholic, those bums, you know. And that, you know, that was the pattern for years, was like, and then that wasn't working. So I'd switch to something else and, you know, I'll just do pills and weed to get off the heroin. And it's such a fucking nightmare of a rat race.
Yeah.
But the weird thing about the medicine world is so many people become struck sober for good from going and doing what is ostensibly a drug.
Yeah, and like I
that makes no sense to my like sober paradigm. How does that work?
Right, and like arguably one of the most powerful hallucinogens that exists, and it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, and it really speaks to the fact that this is a medicine and not a drug, that there's a reverse tolerance with it. So actually over time, you will need less to connect with it. In general, it's not something that you like build a tolerance to and then you need to take more to feel it, you know, kind of thing. It's one of those where the more that you are kind of in that space and connected to it, then actually the less you need to actually get there. And that it's absolutely not addictive. I mean, I certainly know quite a few people that are like, I'm never doing that again because I don't need to. Like I got my answers and hung up the phone, you know, and you know, and then of course there's people that like me, I feel like I have a little bit of a longer term relationship with it. And you know, it's something that that over time I'm more and more spaced out with. And at this point, it's really just like checking in to, you know, make sure the boss is happy with what's going on here. But you know, my time between it is, you know, I have no desire to really get there. And, you know, it's what we hope for anyone who comes through here is, you know, that they'll go home and they'll integrate and they'll do their homework and, you know, live a better life and never come back. Like that would be beautiful, you know. Some people come back like once a year, but yeah, it's certainly something that's not what you would think in terms of like a drug or substance like that.
It's strange that it doesn't trigger other addictions. That's what's weird.
Yeah.
Because I know for myself, there are certain drugs. People that like have never had the problems that to the degree that I and so many of my friends have had, they're like, oh, you could probably smoke weed. No, you're different. Or like, you could have a glass of wine. Like, you're not an alcoholic anymore. I'm like, dude, fucking trust. You just have to trust me. Yeah, you just have to trust me. You think I didn't try that before like I checked myself into a rehab? Who goes to rehab because they're like, I can probably lick this, but I'll go spend 30 grand, you know, just for the fuck of it. It's like, no, dude, there are certain drugs that are truly gateway drugs and they will lead you back to drinking. They'll lead you back to opiates, to coke, to all that. And it's like, for me, I don't know. I've never met anyone that's like, oh man, you know, I was sober and I went and did ayahuasca and now like I want to do ayahuasca every day, or it led me back to other drugs. It's just, it's really interesting in that way.
You know what I think it is? And we were kind of talking about this yesterday. We work a little bit with Gabor Mate, who is a trauma and addiction expert. And he has a big theory about addiction and it, you know, coming from childhood trauma. And he also says this thing that just really struck me as so powerful, which is that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And so this idea that like we are wanting to connect to something and feel that sense of connection. And so, you know, what I'm thinking is that, you know, maybe with some of these other substances, it's almost like your body almost like needs the substance to feel a connection because it's connecting to the substance. Whereas with ayahuasca, it's kind of like a big shiny mirror and it allows you to connect more deeply with yourself. And that's kind of like the ultimate goal of the medicine. At least that seems to be what comes out of people. Is like really integrating with themselves. And once you are able to do that, you know, you don't need the medicine anymore. You're kind of able to take that into your life. And it doesn't necessarily lead you to want to like connect with something else or even need ayahuasca to connect with yourself anymore.
I think that theory makes a lot of sense because in the realm of addiction recovery, it's the underlying trauma typically that leads one to have to self-medicate and then become addicted. And then there's this loop of even more trauma and chaos that's produced by living as an addict. Mm-hmm. But the thing that gets most people sober is having a spiritual experience. And so
exactly.
That's what ayahuasca gives you, as a spiritual experience, you know? And I think, I mean, I've had spiritual experiences on LSD and on mushrooms in my prior life, the latter of which actually led me to getting sober, which I didn't realize until years later, but it was a mushroom journey where I just completely had a meltdown and had a horrible trip. And that trip led me to a couple months later cleaning up.
Oh, wow.
But going back to the addiction thing and the spiritual experience, the whole purpose of the 12 steps, which are undeniably the most widespread and most successful method of getting people sober, the whole purpose of that is to integrate your life in a way that you're living in a spiritual experience, and you live by these sort of aspects of God, which we call spiritual principles. So much so, based on that the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love the history because it's just we're so close to it, and it's kind of so pervasive in our culture. I don't think many people pay attention to what an impact the 12 steps have had on the world, and certainly Western culture. Like just millions of lives have been spared, and millions of family members have been spared from interacting with the toxicity of an addict or alcoholic. But in the beginning, what made that kind of emerge in time and space when it did was this guy, Bill Wilson, who's the co-founder. And he checked himself into a hospital, and he's having delirium tremens from alcohol withdrawals. And he had this what's called a white light spiritual experience, where the wind blew into the room and it was filled with light, and he had this experience of God, and he was struck sober.
Wow.
Yeah, in that moment. And he was like a gnarly, chills. Hardcore, like gin, vodka pounding, like gutter alky, and anyways, the long story, he met this other guy and they started sharing together, and they had that connection. Bill went and talked to this other guy named Dr. Bob, who is a hopeless case in this small town called Akron, Ohio. He goes to see this guy, Bob, because he's like, I got to tell someone, I got to help someone. He got the idea of being of service.
Wow.
So he finds this guy, Bob. It's such a beautiful story. Because when he had that, oh man, I wasn't planning on that. When he had that experience of God, that white light experience, one of the big takeaways was that he had been a selfish motherfucker, and he had to go help other people.
Wow.
Because when you become isolated in addiction or alcoholism, you become so myopic and just so self-centered and selfish. It's just, you're just constantly in this animal survival mode. And so you're just like a wrecking ball through everyone's lives. And it's like this rapacious sort of taker energy, And so he had this experience. He goes find this guy, Bob, who was also hopeless and was like the town drunk of a doctor. And just from talking to each other, they both got sober, and then it blossomed into this thing.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That sobered up millions of people because they found a connection.
Yes.
And it wasn't a judge, a cop, a priest, a rabbi trying to tell them, shaking their finger in their nose, telling them, you need to stop drinking. It's not a moral issue. It's an illness. It's a spiritual illness. And they grew an understanding of that and started these groups and meetings, and it is what it is. But I said all that to say, ultimately, toward the end of his life, Bill Wilson, the co-founder, sort of pulled away from Alcoholics Anonymous, and because there was egoic attachments to it that he started to become aware of, is like, I'm the founder of AA, that kind of thing. So he sought humility and sort of more anonymity in his own life, and stepped out of the kind of the public eye, and then started experimenting with LSD.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because he knew Aldous Huxley, and there was this whole. It's sort of mired in some ambiguity. The history there, there's not a lot known about it, but it's definitely been confirmed that he had a number of different sort of clinical experiences with the LSD, because he sought to find a way to give people a profound spiritual experience like that.
Wow, go figure.
With the quickness, rather than necessarily having to sit in church basements for 25 years.
Sure. Or have it be through some intense amount of suffering. Then you right.
And so it could be said that if a purist of, say, recovery or sobriety could say, well, that guy didn't die sober because he used a drug, right? But I would argue to say that he probably had some pretty profound spiritual experiences, again, that were induced by that psychedelic experience. So
wow. And
I'm just getting my head around, it's like I'm coming at this from the angle of recovery and like how this all plays together. And I'm seeing all these correlations and it's just fascinating.
No, I think that's a beautiful story of finding connection in these different healthy ways that really serve and lead people to be in service. And ultimately, I think when you find that connection, all of a sudden you can realize that you're part of this larger picture, and that maybe the myopic, sense of worldview, all of a sudden it's like there's a lifeline out, and then finding that, then all of a sudden maybe your world can open up, and just that's so powerful and beautiful that like from that connection became a larger community, a global community of people finding connection and finding community and finding that healing in that. And I mean, I think that's, I've really felt that like at the end of the day, and I've had this come to me in ceremony. It was my very first ceremony actually, where I just felt this like love and connection towards all of the important people in my life, and just like really feeling so much gratitude that I had these connections in my life. And I just remember thinking like at the end of the day, it really just comes down to the people. It comes down to the people in your life, and the way that you connect to them, and then beyond that, the world. And so I think people finding that in all of these different ways and all of these different modalities, and being open to like different ways to find that connection is so powerful and so needed right now in this world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you for finding a way to do that yourself here. It's really special.
Cheers. It's an honor, and it's mostly the plants. I'm just kind of following my feet here.
Yeah, I get it. One thing I wanted to ask you before we close is, have you worked with any other plant medicines or psychedelics in a not a Burning Man capacity, but in a, not there's anything wrong with that, no judgment,
sure.
but, in the context of spiritual growth and gaining insights and things like that? And if so, do you and your partner, Dan, have any plans to ever work with any other medicines, or you just really like found your resting place with ayahuasca?
Yeah. So, within the context of Soltara, I think we are, at least for the moment, going to kind of stick with ayahuasca, feeling that it's important for people to make the space to kind of go really deep with this medicine and creating the container for that. That being said, there are many other powerful and effective medicines out there. And I think that, if people are called to different things, just finding the right container for those. So when I was in Peru, I did have the amazing opportunity to work with San Pedro cactus. And so that's mescaline, and it's a totally different but equally powerful, for me, medicine as ayahuasca, but it acted in a totally different way. And it's done during the day, and it's a much longer ceremony. It can last up to 12 hours. And it's a very heart medicine. And I would say that kind of like the closest analog I could think of that people might be more familiar with is kind of MDMA. So in that sort of heart opening, bodily sort of medicine, but having this kind of spirit attached to it as well. Some people say it's kind of like a grandfather spirit. So that was really, really beautiful. And so we would run separate retreats down in Peru where people could come and work with that medicine in the mountains of Cusco and the Sacred Valley. And that to me is also one of my big teachers in this path. So for ayahuasca, for Soltara, really wanting to stick within the tradition of Shipibo. And so they're very, kind of like bare bones about, what is combined with it. And there's other different master plants that they might work with, but that's really for people who are looking to go a little bit deeper. So we're hoping to collaborate with some of the healers who have centers in Peru if people kind of want to go deeper into the learning or apprenticeship path. So.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Last question. What does your family think of you leaving your former kind of normal cookie cutter life and having this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So my mom, my parents were both hippies in the 60s and 70s. And so obviously that's a whole different context. But my mom was super gung-ho about me kind of breaking off and doing this thing that she saw had, such a big effect on me. My dad is kind of where I get my scholarly side from. And so at first he was a little bit more skeptical of like, you're giving up your master's degree from an Ivy League college to go and do like drugs in the jungle with like, corporate America will never accept you after this. And so it was definitely a little bit like, no, I see this is risky for sure. Like this is definitely putting a lot on the line, but I just couldn't I didn't find much meaning in what I was doing at the time. And so since then he's come around and, I'm very lucky to have supportive parents that are just interested in me having my professional happiness. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. My mom's actually come down and done this. And so,
sick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. She did the whole thing for the first time and so proud of her.
God, I would love for my parents to have the opportunity. I don't know that would be in the cards, but man, that's the thing. Whenever I'm on the medicine, I'm like, when the ceremony's over, I'm going to call all my friends. I can think of every friend. Like, you guys have to do this. And then the next morning I'm like, no, don't, it's not, I'm not like Mr. Plant medicine promoter,
but here if you have questions.
Yeah. But I'm just like, oh my God, you can because you see your patterns, but you can also see the familial patterns.
Oh,
and
100%.
the whole lineage. There's such a huge piece of that, of seeing where you came from. And
yeah, that was a huge piece of it.
Your twisted and gnarled family tree of sorts. And
100%.
So it's like, oh my God, if I could somehow get my parents down here and like not tell them what it is or something, I think
they say like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family, right?
Yes, I love that one. Yeah. Yeah. I remember texting my parents and just dropping the word ayahuasca in the text. And I don't think they know what it is probably. So because they would have been like, wait, what? What are you doing?
All right, honey. Sounds
yeah.
good.
And they're just, okay. It just kind of went over their head. We'll just leave it at that for now. Of course, now it's like everything's, I live stream all this shit. So if they I know they follow me on Instagram. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. Yes, I'm here. Don't worry. I'm safe-ish. I'm just forgiving you more.
Generational cycles, man. Doing the work.
All right. So my final question, drum roll please, is who have been 3 teachers or teachings that have influenced your life?
Ooh, 3.
Could be a book, a person, a philosophy, anything like that.
Yeah. So, I'll go with the answer that just immediately comes to me because it's always true. My mom is certainly one of my greatest teachers. We often joke that she's never met a stranger because she just greets everyone with so much love and connection. And she's just got this really like loving, vibrant energy about her. And I'm just, I'm very grateful to kind of have had that relationship with her and continue to have that relationship with her. And then I would say, I'll have to say my dad as well, because from him, I really got the scholarly aspect and also the wonder about the mystery of life from him. So we would go to church, and then when my mom didn't join us, my dad would take us into nature, and we would go on the rocks by the river, and he would say like, "This is my church." And every August around my birthday, we would go and sit under the stars and watch the Perseus meteor shower, and he would kind of explain to me about astronomy and the stars and physics and string theory and all of these different things. And so it really instilled in me a sense of like, there's more to this life, even if I don't necessarily subscribe to the religious aspect of spirituality. And then I would have to say my friend from college, one of my best friends, Katya. She was born in Zimbabwe, grew up in Swaziland. She's Russian, and she came from just extremely like humble living situation where she would have to study by candlelight because the power would be out. And there was water rations and food rations and crazy stuff with the government over there. And she just really like worked her way to come to the US and, go to a school and just really just like make her way. And what struck me the most about her and was so humbling was that wherever she went, she was home. And so she was this like amazing self-contained spirit where wherever she is, there she is. And like, it's just, everything is okay. And that's just been a really grounding, inspiring thing for me who had a lot of fear, kind of leaving to go to a different country and go into the jungle and like, pick up my life and step into the unknown. Just like her bravery and courage. And yeah, so really, really grateful for all of them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. And thanks for doing what you do here and having me down. I'm really excited for ceremony tonight and for everything that's to come. So you've really done something very special here and I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Luke. Thank you so much for coming and for trusting us with your journey too. It's really an honor to be able to kind of connect with you and have you share your story so vulnerably. I mean, it's inspiring. It really is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
More to come. Stay tuned, folks. More will follow. What a long, strange trip it's about to be.
Cheers.